and also get us going with our captions. All right. And then I will go through our basics for you before we get to the presentation part. Got to do a little bit of the basics. So just letting you know that today we're coming to you as part of the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, or MHTTC. And we are going to be today talking about Think Trauma. It's our third session. And going forward, we're just going to go through a little bit of our standard information. Participant microphones will be muted at entry, but if you're with us previously, you will remember that Rocio will give you those times to come off mute and share your opinions. We definitely want to hear from you, and so we'll let you know when those happen, but as long as you're not speaking, please keep your microphones muted so that everyone else is able to hear. And we've also got closed captioning for the event. You can choose what your options are by clicking the closed captioning button. The session is being recorded, and we will have it along with the other 3 sessions available on the MHTTC website. If you have any questions, please use the chat or raise your hand. And our technical support manager, which is me, Leila Cardi, will ensure that your question or concern is addressed. And then also, if you have any questions after this session, please feel free to email newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. And then also Rocio and Doris will add their emails into the chat before we sign off for the day, so that if you have any questions about content, you can go ahead and reach out to them. All right, just covering our basics of language. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. That language is strengths-based and hopeful, inclusive and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, experiences, and perspectives, healing-centered and trauma-responsive, inviting to individuals participating in their own journey, person-first and free of labels, non-judgmental and avoiding assumptions, respectful, clear, and understandable, and consistent with our actions, policies, and products. A reminder, we have a variety of MHTTC regions. Right now, you are in the green New England region, but just to be aware that there are resources available for all of these different regions if you go to mhttcnetwork.org. As well, just an overview of New England's MHTTC's mission, area of focus, and ensuring inclusion. We are using evidence-based means to disseminate evidence-based practices across the New England region, specifically around recovery-oriented practices, including recovery support services, within the context of recovery-oriented systems of care. And ensuring inclusion is a huge piece. We ensure responsiveness of our work, actively developing and maintaining a network of people with lived experience, government officials, policymakers, system leaders, administrators, and community stakeholders, providers, researchers, youth, adults, and family members from each of the 6 states that guide the New England MHTTC activities. So thank you again for joining us today. I am going to turn it over to our wonderful presenter, Rocio Chang, and then also another wonderful presenter, Doris Maldonado.
Thank you so much for the great introduction. Now I'm just going to share my screen. And welcome everyone. Thank you for coming and being here. This, for the people who have joined us in the past, this is the Module 3 of Think Trauma. It's a curriculum that was developed to work with any person who is in contact or working with juvenile offenders. But since then, this curriculum has been used in many other contexts. I mean, I really appreciate the framework that provides and the different ways that brings information into applicable experiences where we can really relate as adult learners. So just briefly, Think Trauma curriculum is a curriculum that was developed by a group of clinicians, mainly was led by Dr. Monique Kumalo and many other colleagues from the National Child Stress Traumatic Network. And it has now the curriculum that I'm showing you is version 2. We had a version 1 that was mainly led by Dr. Kumalo. Version 2, there were other clinicians involved in this big effort. And I have to tell you that all the models sort of cover great information, but like anything, I mean, model 3 for me is the one that is one of my favorites. So I really hope that you find it helpful, and it is my hope also that we can interact during the presentation, because I know that you also have already a lot of wonderful experiences, and it would be really great for our learning as a group to share some of it together. So Model 3 covers coping in context, and that's what we are going to be focusing on. And here are the learning objectives. We're going to describe the impact of traumatic events and adverse childhood experiences on youth expectations. We're also going to describe challenges that trauma-impacted youth face related to the social contract, biases, and systems they navigate. We're going to identify maladaptive survival coping strategies that traumatized youth may use and provide positive alternatives. And we're going to identify and practice components of a trauma-informed safety plan, and that we have been covering in the first 2 models already, and use knowledge to support youth safe behavior. All right. Now, every model has sort of maybe a warning sign, and for whatever reason I skipped that one here. But the warning sign is that whenever we talk about trauma, we all have alarm centers, and our alarm center can become activated as a result of listening to or seeing or watching, traumatic experiences. So I just want to make sure that we all know that how to monitor or how to help our own alarms to be reset. And many times, if any of what we are covering is triggering or triggers something in you, please make sure that you focus on your own self-care. You can take a break from the presentation. Sometimes it helps if we focus on our breathing, if we feel our feet on the floor, our body on the chair. If these sort of sensations continue, I hope that you talk to somebody who you trust, and do what you need to do in order to take care of yourself, which is super important. And that's something that we're going to cover on the last model, model 4. Okay, now I'm going to show you here a video. And this video was developed by a center in Chicago, and it's called Remembering Trauma. There is going to be just a small part that I'm going to show you. But, if you want to see the whole video, you can Google it on Remembering Trauma, and you will find it. So let me just go and try to find it here because I already opened it. Let me see. But of course, it's not here. It's right here. All right. So can you tell me, Lee, if you're seeing it? Yes,
yep.
no?
You just want to put it into the full screen. And
oh, yeah. But you can watch, right?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Oh, we are not seeing the video. I think that might be on your browser. So if you just want to, select just that browser window that had the YouTube. video.
Let me see. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to share again. Maybe that would do the trick. Okay. There.
You can do it. I believe in it.
Now?
Yep. And then you just want to full screen it and get it started, and we can see it and hear it.
Now you can see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hey, she doesn't want to talk to you, man. She doesn't want to talk to you. Back. Oh my God! No! Stop it! Get off of her. Leave me alone, man.
Stop it!
I don't understand what you were thinking. Tell me exactly what happened.
Nothing.
Nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. You know I have to submit a report to the judge.
Who you texting?
Texting a friend. What do you care?
Let me see your phone.
I'm not gonna let you see my phone. It's my phone.
I don't want to violate you, Manny, but this doesn't look good. What were you thinking?
Yo, Mario, what's up?
Come here.
Hey, man, why don't you leave her alone?
I was thinking, I gotta do something.
Well, you sure did something.
Hey, she doesn't want to talk to you, man. She doesn't want to talk to you, man. What are you gonna do about it, huh?
Oh my God! No!
Get off her. Leave me alone, man.
No!
Hi, everyone. Mark Barden here at Sandy Hook Promise.
I'm sorry.
On December 14th, 2012.
Stop it!
Are you using again?
No.
Is that what your drug test is going to tell me?
Yes.
I've known you for a while, and I believe you're a good kid, but your anger could be your undoing. So you've got to do something about that.
It's not as bad as it looks.
You told me this wouldn't happen again.
I know.
Did you get busted again?
No, it's all good. Don't worry about it, babe.
I told you. I don't want my baby around anyone who's violent.
It was just something stupid. I don't even know what happened. I would never hurt our baby.
How am I supposed to trust you? You just broke the one promise you made me. You know I don't want him to grow up with parents like ours.
What are you talking about? You had it easier than I did.
I'm serious.
I'm sorry. Look, all I'm saying is that I'm not like your old man, okay? I can be in control. Can I hold my baby now, please?
Go clean yourself up. I don't want blood on our baby. Annie, bring out a new diaper when you're done. Manny, diapers, please.
Don't make me get up! Hurry up! It's always something with you, you stupid! You'll be sorry! It's always something with you, I want that kid anyway, you're fucking
Manny, did you hear me?
Hey, bud. Seems like you've been having a hard time. Do you want to talk about why you've been getting in fights? Not getting along with the other kids in your class?
How's school, Manny? Good. It was good. Did you do anything fun? No. Is that boy still picking on you? No. Good. Did you tell him who's boss? Manny, wait up. You have to stay close.
Manny! Manny! What's up, man? What's good, bro?
Those boys are idiots. Don't hang out with them.
Also, I've heard that you've been having trouble paying attention. Focusing on your work? Would you be willing to tell me what's bothering you?
Hey, what's good, Manny? What's going on, my man? How's it going? How you doing, man?
Leave my brother alone.
Hey, girl, how you doing? Where you? How you doing? Yeah, where you going, huh? Hey, that's my boy, Nick.
Manny. Manny. Manny, you're not in trouble, okay? I just want to know what's going on.
Fuck off.
What the hell? Where you going, huh? Where you going? What's up?
Oh my God. Manny!
Hello? Oh, hi. Yes, thank you so much for getting back to me. Yeah, so the reason we're recommending testing is we're kind of confused with what's going on. I mean, he's such a sweet kid, but he just seems to be having so much difficulty functioning. Yeah. Okay, I mean, he is hyperactive. His teacher keeps coming to me and, telling me about all of his learning problems. She seems to think that he has ADHD. But, at other times, he just seems to go off into another world. I'm just starting to wonder if it's maybe something developmentally. Yeah, but I mean, then there's other times when he just explodes and gets aggressive. I'm just starting to think that maybe given his family history that it may be some form of bipolar. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to get back to me. I hope this helps inform your testing. Okay, thanks.
Don't go to the supermarket before watching this.
Our bodies are nearly 20% protein.
Bye.
Look, I know you love your kid, and that's a beautiful thing. But you have to start working on making better choices if you want to keep on being the man of your house. And that's real talk.
Maybe I shouldn't even try anymore. Maybe they're better off without me. I'm just gonna screw up like I have my whole life.
Maybe you will, and maybe you won't. But you owe it to your son to try. He's going to be your age one day. And what do you want him to think when he looks back and remembers his dad?
I don't know what's wrong with me. I get really angry sometimes and nothing can calm me down. I don't want to be this way. I have a beautiful girlfriend and a son at home who I love. I just want to protect them from everything. And I've heard it all. I have conduct disorder. I have bipolar disorder. There's probably not much you can do to help me anyways. But people keep asking me what I'm going to do about it. And I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do about it because I can't get any help anywhere. And I've tried all the different meds. And the fact is that they just kind of numb me out, but they don't really help me get over anything.
Manny, we're gonna do our best to make therapy different this time. I'm interested in what happened to you as a child and helping you understand that there can be a connection between that and all these behaviors you've had and you getting all these labels over the years. You know, when a child grows up in a house like you did, oftentimes they come up with ways of dealing with things to help them survive and cope with all that's happened before. I want us to understand together the connections between your behaviors and reactions, the difficult things you've lived through, and why you may be behaving and acting in these ways. If it's okay with you, I want us to work together to see what we're gonna do about this.
I'm sorry for breaking my promise. I'm gonna work on getting better, okay?
You gotta think about your life, Manny. Think about all the good things you've accomplished. Just work on making a better life for our son.
I love you.
All right. So this is actually an opportunity for us to, these are the things that we're going to expand on our conversation today in this presentation, but for us to just figure out how we can weave in this video with the information that we're going to provide as we move along with the presentation. But for us to realize that, you know, the highlights of this video is that, you know, oftentimes, unfortunately, still is happening that kids who have experienced trauma are either under or overdiagnosed, but we don't really understand the whole picture, right? So you had seen in the school counselor, there was a very good school counselor, I have no doubt about it, had great intentions, but definitely was not sure what was happening with this kid, right? You know, the whole scene about a probation officer who was supportive, but who couldn't guess what was happening to Manny, why he couldn't just, you know, control his anger. And, you know, the video does such a good job in just illustrating how difficult it is for a youth who has experienced trauma very early in his life. You know, we talked in the first two models about intrusive thoughts. We talk about different reactions. And you can actually see that happening for Manny, right? How he definitely also still try to understand what's going on with him, how he can really, you know, he probably does not even understand yet what are his triggers, right? How come he feels, you know, from just one moment he feels okay and the next moment he might be exploding, right? You know, we had seen also how quickly he dissociates. So this short clip show us, and it's a review, and it's a very difficult review of what we have covered in the first two models about how trauma impacts the life of an individual, but also impacts the life of their family unit, and also, you know, impacts many other contexts of where this individual goes, right? So that's also important for us to keep in mind as we move ahead with the rest of the presentation. So reflecting on remembering trauma and identifying reminders, what potential trauma reminders did you notice for Manny? And feel free to talk about it or to write in the chat and let me know. How is that? What
also,
would you?
Rocio, we can still see the video, but if you want to switch it back to your PowerPoint.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So here you go. You can see it now. Yes. So the question is, what potential trauma reminders did you notice for Manny? There were a few, right? So if nobody's writing in the chat, then I'm just going to start talking. Or you got
lots.
What is it?
We've got lots coming in from the chat. We've got PTSD from Veronica, denial, anger, deep-seated emotional and mental problems from Chuck, and then being asked to bring something was another one that Kelsey indicated.
Yeah. So, you know, the big also thank you. Other reminders are, you know, Manny experienced domestic violence at home, right? He was very young when that happened. So, you know, any sort of confrontations or physical altercations might be triggering, might be trauma reminders for him. You know, and there are a lot of other sort of feelings and emotions that go about, you know, with that, you know, in terms of, you know, here is this little kid trying to sort of figure out how he could help his mom at that point, but definitely he couldn't, right? And there were like different things that probably he experienced during those events. And unfortunately, as we have talked about with domestic violence, usually it's not really an isolated experience that happen in families. Unfortunately, domestic violence incidents happen for prolonged periods of times, and there are more than one type of trauma as a result of. And then, we are seeing Manny walking, very young, walking with his sister, having his sister, unfortunately, abused by these two adolescents, right? So, and again, him seeing how his sister got abused and not being able to do anything. So, so those trauma reminders are something that are really difficult, right? Physiologically, we know that there are many different reactions that happen very, very quickly in a matter of milliseconds. And then, as a young adult, his body, his brain reacts towards protecting this other person who might be in danger, by protecting this other person, but also dissociating at the same time and not knowing when to stop. So those are some of sort of the illustrations that we're going to keep on building up. All right. So we talk about the invisible suitcase in the in module 2. So the invisible suitcase usually is unpacked. We don't see it, right? And how we can link this to trauma and to our own expectations. So previous life experiences create expectations that guide behavior, right? So when I gave you the example of what happened when we are in a sunny day, we decide to go and walk in the forest or a garden or a park, and we see a snake, right? And then the next time that we are walking and we see a hose, our brain is going to first interpret a hose as a snake, right? So previous life experiences create expectations that guide our behavior. So that's one example. And in the case of Manny, there were actually very difficult life experiences that create certain expectations for him, right? Expectations based on traumatic life events are shaped by experiences of danger before and following traumatic event, right? Messages from others and society. It depends on how society, the community respond to it. That also will determine how this traumatic experience is perceived by a person, especially by a child. And perceptions of best strategies to remain safe. So this is how expectations based on traumatic life events are shaped by all of these three characteristics, okay? Now, when we focus on the context of danger, safety, and protection, we need to realize that traumatic experiences shift expectations about threats to personal and family safety. So also, it's also important to recognize that intergenerational trauma reflects the impact of trauma across generations, and that when parents experience trauma, it can impact their parenting and their decisions to keep their children safe. So we saw that in the video with Patrick Willis, and how difficult it was, his upbringing, and how challenging it was for his father to provide the care that the children needed, right? And we just started wondering what happened to the father and what happened to many different generations before the father. that impacted, the type of parenting that Patrick Willis got. And similarly, we can see in Remembering Trauma a similar situation. Now, when we talk about breaking the social contract, and many times when children have been highly traumatized, it's very hard to trust. It's very hard to feel safe. And many times, the systems, the systems who are supposed to protect these kids fail to protect them, right? Oftentimes we talk about caregivers, but also, we don't live in isolation. We are part of communities. We are part of, of different systems, and children are part of these systems. And sometimes when systems fail to protect children, there is already an experience of breaking the social contract. And when this is broken, then, children who grow up to be young adults do not feel the same sort of, do not establish a healthy connection or relationship with these systems, right? So think about this. How did Manny's girlfriend make it easier or more difficult for him to deal with his trauma reminders? What do you think from what you saw in the video? You can talk or you can write down things in the chat. And Lee, let me know.
Will do.
Okay. I'm going to start talking, but please feel free to add your ideas, observations. So, what we also understand in the clip is that Manny's girlfriend also had some past traumatic experiences, right? And oftentimes when young adults unfortunately who have experienced multiple traumatic events early on in their lives, we know that their alarm centers will be more reactive. So in this case, I think that if we try to see the big picture in this young couple, probably, some of their behaviors from each of them might be triggering the other, right? And in the case of what was happening with Manny coming from a fight, that definitely was something that triggered the girlfriend. And I'm not quite sure if I want to respond about how easier or difficult the girlfriend's reaction was perceived by Manny. But I actually want to talk about, the challenges that this young couple might be experiences as a result of their past. And, how important it is for us to also recognize this whenever we are providing services to individuals who, deserve to have healthy relationships, and they might be experiencing some challenges along the way because of what we already know, right? And, I think that we are all enough to agree that, relationships are a lot of work, and it takes effort to establish connections that can be long-lasting, and and to establish connections that where both of the people involved in a relationship have safe spaces. And that they continue to trust each other and to support each other, right? When our alarms are more reactive for, obvious reasons in terms of, the different traumatic experiences, it is not impossible to establish healthy relationships, but it might take a little bit more work and it might take a little bit more effort. So personal and family experiences of danger beyond trauma further undermine belief in the social contract. And that's something that we have been talking a little bit about, right? So, if the people, if adults who were supposed to protect kids were unable to do so for whatever reason, and if the systems, parts of different communities who also were supposed to protect kids were not there, then it's really hard to sort of sustain a social contract with people or with systems that were not present in the way that these kids needed to. So here for us to reflect is, how did institutions or providers made it easier or more difficult for Manny to deal with these trauma reminders, right? And from what we saw is that, providers didn't have a clue about what Manny was going through. They were seeing the behavior, his behaviors, but they were not really understanding what was causing these behaviors. So, some providers might be quick enough to make diagnosis, but the diagnosis might not, if there is not enough understanding, diagnosis might hurt the progress and the recovery of individuals. And that's actually something important for us to consider. And from now, I'm going to go to the adverse childhood experiences. So these, I don't know how many of you have heard about the adverse childhood experiences. It's a sort of, I think that it's safe to say that it has been a research study that has contributed a lot to the field of psychology and psychiatry, and continues making a big difference. This was completed, I believe, in the late 1980s, and it was conducted by Dr. Felitti from Kaiser Permanente and Dr. Anda from the CDC. The story goes that Dr. Felitti was running a weight loss clinic in Kaiser Permanente, and he was actually working with adults who were morbidly obese, and his clinic became very successful. So the patients were losing significantly weight, things were really working out. But then he started observing that these patients who were losing weight were also not coming back to the clinic. And he was trying to figure out what was it that, did not, what was impacting patients for them to come back. And, a few months later, he noticed that the patients who lost significantly weight, they were coming back after a while to the clinic, but now they have more weight than when they started the weight loss clinic. So there was something there going on, but he didn't really know exactly what. And he started by asking psychosocial questions to his patients. And one of them, he asked, how old was a woman? How old was she when she became sexually active? And the woman replied that she was 5 years old. So that's when he started thinking, there is something here that I haven't really seen, but it's something important to study, and came out with the adverse childhood experiences that united forces with Dr. Anda, an epidemiologist from CDC, and together they surveyed more than 17,000 adults, and they were asking questions that were yes or no answers to, what happened to them before the age of 18. There were 10 questions, and these questions were, before the age of 18, were you sexually abused? Before the age of 18, was a caregiver using alcohol or drugs in your household? Before the age of 18, did you witness domestic violence? Before the age of 18, was one of your parents incarcerated? So all of the questions were set to sort of capture any experience, any major experience with adverse childhood experience. So this was truly important, because what the results showed is that, there were significant results that needed to, that really could show us a lot more than and could really be something that we could correlate with what happened to an individual throughout their lifespan, and how much adverse childhood experiences could impact an individual's life in general, whole life. So here are the questions, the adverse childhood experiences questions. There were 3 questions about abuse: physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse, neglect, physical neglect and emotional neglect, and 5 questions about household dysfunction: whether or not a caregiver had a mental illness, whether or not a caregiver was incarcerated, if there was domestic violence, if an adult was used substances, and if parents were divorced. And think about this. There were 10 adverse childhood experiences, right? But if we think about this, we know that there were some adverse childhood experiences that were not captured in this first very important survey, right? The other thing that I want to tell you is that for the most part, out of the more than 17 people who were surveyed, most of them were white from a middle class families. So, we definitely had a very homogeneous group, but was actually, it provided very good results, very sad results, but important for us to understand how ACEs, how adverse childhood experiences could impact the lives of individuals. So here are some of the experiences that were not included in the first survey: bullying, teen dating violence, peer-to-peer violence, witness violence in community or school, homelessness, death of a parent. We can also add experiencing discrimination, experiencing racism, police brutality. We could add, we could add also in certain communities what's happening, being separated from their parents in the borders, things that we know that are also adverse childhood experiences that impact communities of color. But from the first survey, from the first study, these are the results. 11% of adults endorsed that they were psychologically abused as children before the age of 18. 28% endorsed physical abuse. 21% sexual abuse. 15 emotional neglect, 10% physical neglect, 27% endorsed that there was one adult in their household that was using substances, a mother, a father, or a caregiver. 23%, they also endorsed being abandoned by one of the parents. 17% endorsed that, one of the parents suffered from a mental illness. 13 battered mother, and 6% criminal behavior that, ended up in one of the parents or caregiver being incarcerated. So if you think about this, the percentages are high and they are significant. And then when they completed more analysis, what they also started concluding was that, 4 or more ACEs, 4 or more adverse childhood experiences contributed to a disrupted neurodevelopment in individuals, also contributes to impairment in social, emotional, and cognitive skills, also contributes to adapting the adoption of health risk behaviors. Then these individuals also experience more disease, disability, and social problems. And this is actually something super important. Individuals who endure 4 or more ACEs tend to have life expectancy compared with peers of the same age. They tend to die 20 years younger. 20 years younger. So that's pretty significant too. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, the first study was completed in a very homogeneous group, with a very homogeneous group. And then, just recently, less than 10 years ago, there was another study, and there are some others that are going on right now, that was trying to see whether or not, doing the study in urban settings, we will get similar results or we will get different results. So here is the urban ACEs study that only surveyed less than 2,000 people. And, like the first one, we said that it was more than 17,000, but clearly we have also some results that are important and contribute to our understanding. So this is sort of the demographics. There were 41, almost 42% men, 58% women, and this is the representation in terms of race. You can see here. So 42% Black, 41% white, 4% Latino, and the race is 4% Asian, biracial is 4%. So, so then when they compare the original ACEs study versus the urban ACEs study, what is noticeable here, and here the green is for the urban study and purple for the original one, is that in urban settings, the ACEs are actually higher. So for physical abuse, the endorsement was of 35% versus 28% in the original ACEs study. The emotional abuse endorsed was 33% versus almost 11% in the original study. Mental illness of a parent was 24% in the urban setting versus 19% in the original study. So you can see that the percentages are even higher. So if we sort of try to make a good use of this data, we can only guess that the lifespan of an individual from urban settings is going to be even shorter than if you compare people from non-urban settings, okay? Now, so now we are trying to figure out how we can keep on giving meaning to this study. And one of the things that, more research have contributed to is that we can really make some conclusions about how trauma and adverse childhood experiences are impacting public safety and also are contributing to health challenges, right? So when we pair ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and also we think about the adverse community environments, we could definitely understand more and see a bigger picture about what's happening, right? So when we refer to adverse community environments, we refer to poverty, discrimination, community disruptions, lack of opportunity, and economic mobility and social capital, poor housing, quality and affordability, violence, right? All of these who are actually at the root of what families experience, right? And then, what kids experience, which are the adverse childhood experiences about, and these are just examples, maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, substance abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, incarceration, mental illness of a parent or of adult in the household, divorce, physical and emotional neglect. So this is super important to understand because for the most part, I'm a psychologist and I'm really sad to say that, psychologists have always focused on the individual, but we are just beginning to understand and to include, how systems are actually impacting the individual's life and what we all can do and what are some of the things that we need to bring into treatment in order to make sure that that we can at least contribute to a better understanding and hopefully to better recovery for the people who we served.
Hi, Rocio. I've got a question from Angela in the chat, asking just to go back one slide as she has a question. Angela, you can feel free to come off mute if you'd like to ask that one. And also, I'm not sure exactly, you sent the message at 11:54, so I'm not sure which slide it was. So if you want to let Rocio know, that would be great.
It might be a couple prior to this one. There you go.
This one,
I think here, you were talking about life expectancy, or was it the previous one?
Yes, this is the one.
Okay, so I do have a question in terms of, this is a historical, this has been used for a long time. Has there been any representation of this over the course of time? It's like, okay, now we know these things. How are we using this to impact policy so we deal with some of the triggers for the adverse outcomes? I just want to know, like, what are we doing now that we know this? What are we doing with it?
Angela, that's a great question. So, obviously I think that this original study has more than 3 decades. Right, like the results are there. Nobody really surveyed 17,000 participants. So this study was remarkable in many different ways and at many different levels. And institutions that have power and hold power were part of the study, like CDC, and Kaiser Permanente. So I am sure that the results have been distributed to the people who have the power in order to do things and to make changes. I believe, and I want to say that there are some changes, and I also want to say that the changes are not enough, unfortunately. But I think that we are discussing and talking about this because it still is super relevant and it's still, from whatever position that we are and whatever sort of resources that we have, we can hopefully unite forces and try to continue making a difference. But it has, I know that it has been distributed, and there are many different other research studies that are going on as a result of the big one.
And this particular slide, so we're looking at some of the potential root causes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people in the various agencies that actually address some of these issues in their day-to-day, you know, you talk about violence, might be the police or poverty, or, you know, there are municipal agencies, there are, you know, schools, there's all kind of different ways that some of these issues can be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And your comment about life expectancy in urban settings versus more rural, you know, we're coming up on the hard statistics now that, you know, when you look at policy maps and different things, you can see literally the difference in life expectancy from one point on the map to 3 miles away, urban, you know, suburb, like Hartford to West Hartford is 15, 20 miles difference in life expectancy.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this information, we have the statistics, we know the impact. And again, how are we doing anything different other than documenting it? What are we doing to impact, to address it, is my question.
Yeah. And it's a great question. I think that, you know, like from my role is, you know, gathering information and disseminating it as much as possible. And whoever wants to hear it, I'm ready to provide it. I know that there are different initiatives and there are different efforts. Unfortunately, I don't think that we are doing enough yet, but hopefully we will be. A great point.
I mean, this information, and I don't mean to belabor the point, but like our local police departments are asked to do a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And equipped with this type of information, I think it would help them in changing their perspective in how they address people. Now we have the HEART team, which is, you know, mental health supports going out on some calls instead of the police.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the police still need to have the sensibility of having this information in their day-to-day activities. Mm-hmm. I would implore your, you know, whether it be UConn, whoever, to try to get this information to those folks that are boots on the ground dealing with folks on a day-to-day basis. Having this perspective, I think, would help them do what they do better, and also help to bridge the gap in the relationships that, you know, police are in some instances no longer looked at as, you know, positive role models. These are the people that can help you, because there's been so much friction over the course of the last few years. And that's just one area, you know, teachers, and there's all kinds of ways that this information can help to move the needle. I've been looking at the life expectancy gap, and mm-hmm. you know, there's health system issues, but there's issues here on just how folks are dealing with each other and not knowing what has impacted someone's life to get, you know, it's like you don't know what you don't know. And so I don't know, it just makes sense to me that this should be shared in almost every venue. If there's public engagement, like you should you should know.
Yeah, I mean, we will be happy. And, remember that these models are trained of trainers. So whoever would like to also train, Doris and I will be more than happy to support you. And oftentimes, like we can accompany you too, because definitely this is something that we want to disseminate. We want to figure out how we can reach out to more people. And it is free, it's easily accessible. You can find all the facilitator guidelines and the PowerPoint presentations and the vignettes and everything in the website that I showed you prior. And and we are available to support in any way. So thank you for that, Angela.
If I may interrupt you, Rocio, I wanted to add on to what Angela was sharing, because I do have experiences in what she was addressing and trying to address and suggest. And I put it in the chat room. Dr. Damian Grasso at UConn has also led forums for legislators with NAMI, with children in placement, through the Association for Infant Mental Health. They have provided information, testimonials, and trainings. They have run the gamut statewide and nationally. Our certified educators, which is why I became a teacher after my older age as a parent, I found out as a teacher we were only required 2 classes, 2 courses in special education and disability, where ACEs was just a brief topic. You add to that the agencies and the legislators that need to hear from their constituents and their communities. The onus is on, and it has always been on, the communities and the voting members to hold those accountable. I was on the Police Accountability Task Force for Disabilities Subcommittee and Public Awareness, and they only have, cadets only have 3 hours to train on disabilities, and that in Connecticut, that training is as old as the 80s. It hasn't been updated. It's still, the Police Accountability Task Force went in full throttle, and for 2 years throughout COVID, we were meeting and we created a robust agenda for the police to be able to not only, they're typically reactive. We live in a reactive system, even with our updated norms and inclusivity, but it's very reactive, and they have the 3 hours, and then on juvenile justice, they have 1 hour. And those are both optional. So then they came about with the mental health providers coming out with them and the social workers, but still that's not enough. And it's not until we see that this is a part of everyday life, the disabilities, the mental health, all of that, to be inclusive and mandate it to be across the board, is when we're going to get anywhere, unfortunately. And even in faith-based communities, that's been a hard push forward. I've experienced that myself. So thank you for that, Angela, for raising that. And it has been done, but it needs to be done across the board. And we work in pockets and silos, and there's only so much we can do as one person or as one organization. So thank you for bringing that. And I know that you have plenty of areas and districts and communities that you serve as a voice for and about. And we hope that you relay this information and pass that on as well. Thank you. I'm sorry, Rocio.
No, thank you so much. This is super important, and this is why we are all here. So I really appreciate your comments and your feedback and your participation. So we also now, I think that it's important also to realize that systems can induce trauma, right? And When systems responsible for protecting children and the public do not understand the impact of trauma, and this is what we have been talking about, they might unintentionally cause further harm. And so, talking about breaking social contracts, this is one of the main reasons. Okay.
Rocio, I'm thinking it might be, if it works for you, a good time for a break for folks to take a second, because we have had such amazing conversation. And thank you again for bringing that up, Angela, and getting us talking about this subject. But just giving us about 15 minutes to collect ourselves, grab a snack, grab some water, and come back for a little bit of a later session.
Perfect. Thank you. So what time are they coming back?
I will set a timer for 15 minutes, and then folks can just join us. I will just check that time in just 1 second. I'm bad at math, so I will let the robot tell me instead of giving you the wrong time. All right.
12:27.
Yes. Let's do that. Okay.
All
right.
Thank you.
Hi, folks. Just a heads up that we have about a minute left on the timer. So please come back and join us in just about a minute. We'll get started at 12:28.
All right. We are back. All right. Excellent. So I'm going to share again my screen. And we are here. Welcome back. So we talk about when systems responsible for protecting children and the public do not understand the impact of trauma, they might unintentionally cause further harm, right? So that's important to know. And again, you know, this is what SAMHSA sort of recommend. It recommends the 4 R's. And with the 4 R's for systems to become trauma-informed, what they need to know is they need to realize the impact of trauma in a child's life. They need to recognize, right, trauma. They need to know how to respond in a trauma-informed way to the needs of children, families, communities. And they also need to focus on how, you know, the systems can resist re-traumatization. So that's also important, and it's an important role that systems can play, right? You know, and these can be some examples can be, you know, what you are seeing here, kids who go to courts, for instance. You know, there are many different ways where we could really support kids and resist re-traumatization, right? Depending on the situation. You know, and I'm glad to tell you that in some areas this has already happened, you know, and definitely there is always room for improvement. But one example is, you know, kids who have been sexually abused, and they, you know, course originally they would sort of have them in the same room with the perpetrator testifying. I mean, those things are really, you know, they're re-traumatizing for anybody, but, you know, more for a child. So that's a very cruel example, but those are some things that unfortunately kept on happening. And I understand that now, you know, some courts have taken different measures. So now kids can testify by being recorded in a different room. So, you know, like they are more protected. And that's the important piece. And, you know, we can see other situations where we need to make sure that we have these trauma lenses to figure out how kids can be protected and how the system can respond in a more trauma-informed way. All right, so it is not surprising, unfortunately, we have been talking about this since the beginning, that, you know, kids in the juvenile justice also tend to endorse more adverse childhood experiences than when compared with the general population, their peers. And here are sort of the percentages. if we are comparing them with Kaiser Permanente insured individuals, kids from juvenile justice tend to endorse 4 or more ACEs versus 50% of these kids tend to endorse 4 or more ACEs versus 13% of the Kaiser Permanente insured group. So think about it. It's truly detrimental, and we know that it has long-lasting impact in an individual having 4 or more ACEs. When we compare ACEs and gender, we'll know that there are some differences in gender differences in how much ACEs are reported by the genders, right? So you can see the percentages here. Males are blue, females are orange. So for instance, emotional neglect is more reported in females than males. Sexual abuse, 31% of female endorse that versus 7% of males. What is another one that's big? Physical abuse, 41% of females versus 26% of males. So just for us to know that there are some differences. And when we analyze the impact of adverse childhood experiences and recidivism, we also are going to realize that, just as expected, the more ACEs, the higher recidivism. Okay? So then we talk about multi-system involved youth, right? These are youth who, are part of the child welfare system first, and then as they grow older, they also become part of the juvenile justice system. So youth involvement with the child welfare system generally indicates youth are facing challenges at home or in the community that place them at risk for behaviors leading to justice involvement. So here are some of the challenges. Maltreatment is a risk factor for delinquent behavior. Educational, mental health, and substance abuse problems are prevalent in this population. Many youth are in foster care for long periods of time, and the lack of cross-system communication leads to many youth falling through the cracks. So here are some of the barriers to trauma-informed interactions with multi-system youth. When we talk about this, we want to ask ourselves the question, what are examples of actions from school, child welfare, and juvenile justice settings intended to help youth, but are actually harmful? Can you think about any examples of actions from school, child welfare, and juvenile justice settings that are intended to help youth, but are actually harmful? Can you come out with some? All right. Maybe you're writing in the chat. I need you let me know if that's happening. But oftentimes, one thing that stands up for me is that, the juvenile justice system, for instance, has a different philosophy than the child welfare system, than the school system. And sometimes having different philosophies can impact and can harm the treatment that youth get. So because not everybody is in the same page. Some systems might be focusing on recovery versus other systems might be focusing on controlling behavior or punishment. So that presents challenges.
We also
There
have
are
some folks in the chat, Rocio, I'm so sorry,
Go ahead.
of folks sharing. And Angela pointed out that children often act out to draw attention to problems that they often don't have the ability to verbalize. How do systems take this into account, especially when not re-traumatizing our youth? Doris added in punitive detention and isolation. And Angela also threw in suspensions, potentially putting children back in harm's way, especially if the root of the problem is at home. Children being seen and not heard, do as I say, not as I do. And then also Chuck was adding in that when staff negates the emotional, mental, and physical demeanors of the children who are expressing the demeanors, these are all factors that could be actually harmful.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. These are really good. All right. Is there anybody else? I really like Angela's comments. I think that they're really applicable. And, you know, unfortunately, we also hear in the news, and some of us might have been part of this conversation or interactions where, you know, like young kids are sent to, are suspended, or the police is called to control certain behaviors. You know, that can really harm the kid many times, right? And we're talking young kids as young as kindergarten. So that's very sad. Now, so the principles for a trauma-informed juvenile justice system, we have talked about this for a while now. I think that every model, we mentioned this, you know, safety is the number one. It's a very nice sort of foundation of what we try to do. We know that when we experience trauma, that's the first thing that sort of is truly impacted, our sense of safety. And, you know, physiologically, we need to feel safe enough in order to have a learning brain and not a survival brain. So safety is super important. You know, establishing trust, feeling empowerment, collaborating, you know, like having a supportive environment by counting with a good peer support. And also, you know, it is important that the people who are interacting with us know about how trauma impacts the lives of people. They become trauma competent. And then it's super important that whatever service we provide, it takes into consideration the cultural, historical, linguistic, and gender needs of the groups that we provide services or the individuals that we provide services. So here are some important information to consider. So when the system responses to specific populations, all right? Homeless youth are at greater risk for experiencing trauma than other adolescents, especially females. So this is a population that we need to pay special attention and provide good services, trauma-informed services. Special needs youth are 10 times more likely to be abused than their typically developing counterparts. Another group. LGBTQ plus youth, content with violence directed at them in response to suspicion about or declaration of their sexual orientation and gender identity. This is another group that our systems need to really protect. And children of color and females are disproportionately represented in the crossover youth population. All right? So these are important things to consider. Now, this is another tape that I want to show you, and I want to alert you that this is also very difficult to watch. So let's try to focus on our own needs and our own alarm center, and then we can debrief together. So this is actually a real story of a woman by the name of Nin, and she's talking about her experiences with trauma chronic trauma during her childhood. And Lee, you let me know if this is working. Is that working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies, and thank you so much for coming out and spending a little time with me tonight. I'm so thrilled to be here, to be able to stand in front of you beautiful, wonderful women and just help you to understand that it's all about you. So I'm telling you, I'm standing before you with 83 arrests and 66 convictions. They say I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail or die in the streets. And I tell you today, not so. Not so. And, you know, I end up with the drug addiction of 19 years. But you know, I don't have to tell you about what it is that goes along with drug addiction, do I? I really don't. But what I want to tell you that it wasn't using drugs that was the problem. It was what happened to me as a child. My mother would entertain a lot of different men. She would be partying and you would hear her singing and, you know, laughing. But when the music stopped, I knew I was going to start hearing the footsteps come towards our bedroom door. And at age 9, I positioned myself in front of the bedroom door to protect my brothers and sisters, but in the event, it made me available to the men. I brushed my teeth because I thought maybe I could brush away the smell of the men when they did the acts to my mouth. My mother's an alcoholic. She's always been an alcoholic, and sometimes she would leave the household 2 and 3 days at a time. Well, finally at age 11, somebody thought that something was truly wrong in our household. Because we were always looking out the windows, but we weren't allowed to play. My mother wouldn't allow us outside because she didn't want anyone to know what was going on in that apartment. Well, somebody thought that was wrong, and they called the Department of Social Services. And when social service came into the household and seen the conditions we were living in, they immediately removed us from that household and put us into foster care. Well, we ended up going to court, and I remember the court day. I was excited because I was seeing my brothers and sisters. And we were on a pew. And in the front, my mother was there. She was crying. She was real upset. And sitting beside her, y'all, I don't know where they found him at, was my father. He was sitting there. Not to say I'm going to take my kids home with me, but to give reasons why he wasn't. So 9 family members was allowed to choose each and every one of them. And I ended up with my cousin. And she was a nurturing and good person. This is my cousin. She's actually my second cousin, but when I was growing up, I always thought she was my aunt because the older generation was like aunts. But when I came into your household and you guys gave me so much love and you showed me how to take care of myself, and it was good time because I was getting up there in age, and because I never knew how to wash myself or wipe myself. Barbara didn't teach me that. So you taught me all of that stuff. I remember you being in the bathroom with me, showing me how to take care of my hygiene, because I didn't know. And talking to me, patiently talking to me. I wasn't used to being like a normal kid because the living situation I came out of. My mother came to the household where I was living, and she called me, Ning, because that's what my mother calls me. So I ran downstairs and I opened up the door and I ran and she hugged me and she said, I love you. I want you to come back and live with me. She told me she loved me, the words that I've been dying to hear from her.
I was crying because I knew I was going to miss you, but I was crying as you was going toward where you were going to stay and going back home to your mother. And I just kept praying on the inside that everything was going to be okay.
Within a week, she severely beat me in the middle of the street for trying to go to school. By then, she had 3 more kids. I realized she wanted a babysitter. She didn't want me back because she loved me. I didn't know how to live without my mother because I knew I couldn't live with her. So I remember taking an overdose. I remember waking up in the emergency room. I remember when nobody asked me, what happened to you? I remember them telling me, you're going back home with your mother, and being terrified. So she came up with this great idea that one of her drinking buddies, who thought I was cute, he was 24, I was a child basically. wanted to marry me. What was that? An opportunity to make my mother proud of me once again. I jumped on it. I'm walking down the aisle. She signed the papers. I didn't even have to be there because I was a minor. So I moved, so I'm married. I'm married, and my mother's living with me, and my husband would come home, and he would do like this. And if it was dust on his finger, he wanted to know what was I doing all day long that I could not dust his house. Well, there was many beatings because I didn't dust his house. Age 19, somebody came to me and said, try this. And it was crack cocaine. I ain't get no beatings for dusting the house no more, because after one hit of crack, I cleaned my house. I went upstairs, cleaned the neighbor's house. I was outside washing everybody's cars. Shoot, I ain't get that beating no more. But you know what? Using crack cocaine introduced me to the criminal justice system.
80% of our population has been traumatized. The trauma is the underlying reason and the basis that leads to the self-medication, the drug use, and then eventually landing in jail.
But I didn't know how not to come back. I didn't know how to stay clean. And something inside of me just, I didn't have the motivation to want to be sober. Because I went back to my reality. Homelessness, putting myself in harm's way, staying with people that was going to beat me and hurt me and stuff. Like, you know, so it was easy just drinking drugs. And unfortunately, it landed me right back here really quick.
Up to 90% of individuals who are in the public mental health system have been victims of trauma. About 85% we know from Department of Justice of girls in the juvenile justice systems have been the victims of early physical or sexual abuse. About 97% of homeless women who have mental health issues have been the victims of trauma while they were on the streets. 87% have been the victims of early childhood abuse. Over 50% of women in substance use programs report histories of incest. I mean, it's just universal.
I met Tonya Kane several weeks ago at a conference here in Baltimore when this sensible young woman came up and looked me dead in the eye and told me that she had an ACE score of 10, that she had experienced all 10 of the categories that I was talking about. Tell me something about cocaine. What's the good part of it?
What's the good part about crack cocaine? It's a number. It absolutely, positively numbs out any feeling you have, only for a few seconds. That's why you got to keep doing it again and again. But there is no concern. So, I mean, I used to take a hit of crack cocaine, and I used to get high on the fact that I had it in my hand. It didn't even get in my system yet. But because I know in the next few seconds, I'm going to be somewhere else, and I don't have to deal with reality. I couldn't use drugs and alcohol because I was in jail. So I had to find something that helped me cope, and that's what helped me cope. I would fight, I would argue, I would cuss, I would go on lock, and I would get off lock, I'd do my lock time, and, you know, oh well, see y'all later, I'll be back.
And I would mutilate myself, my thighs, my neck have cuts, my arms. And it wasn't to kill myself, just to get the pain out. That was just a way to express the trauma. I felt helpless. I felt powerless. And being a woman in a powerless situation, it brought trauma. Because the trauma came from those situations where as though I was taken advantage of and felt powerless.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here in New York City. I'm down at the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women for violation of parole. And I'm pregnant. And I'm terrified that I'm about to lose another child. And I remember running around and telling people about my fears. I don't want to lose my baby, and I had this baby. And they were telling me about this program called Ted Marsh Children. Well, they said, you know, it works on your trauma. I said, well, I don't know what that is, but I know I got it. And it works on your addiction. I said, well, that's a given. Your mental health, yep, I'm crazy. You recover and you keep your baby with you. Perfect program for me, right? I was keeping my baby. And the first thing that someone said to me when I got to this program, the first session I had, my therapist told me, everything that happened to you as a child happened to you, you didn't do to yourself. And I believed her. And we started to work. See, because you good folks, you know, substance abuse, even some judges, even parole and probation, try to help me, try to give me some tools on how to live. But you know, the good information was only surface. It couldn't get where it needed to get for me to get it rooted so I can build a foundation and grow from. So my belief system can change from I am nothing to I am somebody, and I can be anything I want in this world. So you had to get it out of me to get the good information down there where it needed to be. My therapist, her first task was to help me to feel safe. Because without feeling safe, there was no healing for me. Everything that I needed, I was able to get from this program. I had someone to help me to understand parenthood. You know, helping me to form a secure attachment with my child. I didn't know how to be a mother. You know, I know how to give birth to a baby. For Landra, you know, she lives in a home where she's being loved, where I own my own home. She's been given the opportunity to go to a private school where she'll get the best education. You know, she's being hugged all the time and told that she's loved and worthwhile. She will never know what it's like to be hungry or to wait for somebody to be able to get money to feed her. Treating my trauma totally broke that intergeneration curse. I'm told that she's conditioned by her environment. She adjusts to what she's learned. And if that's the case, then she will be able to give her children what she was given, you know, so that curse has been broken. And we begin to look at a different cycle in our generation path from here on out. I need to help people. I need people to be able to grow and move in my direction, because a lot of people see me and automatically know that I did it and they can do it. When paramedics come to a house and somebody have a heart attack, they feel the pulse. And you know what? It could be faint. They could hardly hear. And you remember, I did not have a pulse, but they get to working on that person, don't they? And they try to resuscitate that person. So why can't we do that for the people the trauma victims and the people that's suffering in substance abuse out there? Why can't we keep working to resuscitate their lives? Why can't we keep working at it? Why can't we work at it ourselves? 83 arrests and 66 convictions. 3 times down here and multiple times in the county jail. They said I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail and die. I wasn't going to amount to anything. Not so. Not so.
All right. Any reaction? So we are talking about how systems can induce trauma. So this is actually one very, really, unfortunately, very great example of it. But any reactions towards this video? No reactions. Okay. So Lee, you let me know if there are any on the chat. I also want you to know that, Nin, she has her own foundation. She works for the federal government now. So she has, she has really turned her life around, and she's helping people to understand. And that is very positive, I think. She can also, she's a very good role model for the other women who are struggling. And, all of her struggles have not gone away. Her mom continues struggling with alcoholism. And, but, she is in a different place. So that's what's making a difference. And, trauma impacts your life, and there are some things that you can recover, and there are some others that you cannot, or, they're going to be, the process is going to be longer. During her struggles with substance dependence, Nin lost her parental rights of, I believe, 4 of her kids. And to this day, she doesn't know where they are at. because it was a close adoption. So, like there are many different ramifications of trauma, and there are many people that are impacted by it. And, she speaks so highly, and she's really a person who I truly admire for her resiliency and her drive to continue moving forward. And she's not only making a difference in her own life, but she's making a difference in many other people's lives too, and she's allowing us to learn from it. So historical trauma refers to cumulative emotional and psychological wounding as a result of group traumatic experiences. A history of violence, prejudice toward a community can lead to distrust of institutions intending to help youth. Impact of trauma across generations can influence parents and children's expectations about safety and determine important behaviors for protection, such as distrusting institutions. Okay? So we all can identify with it. Now, here is actually another of my, a person who I admire greatly, and his name is Brian Stevenson. And I don't know how many of you have watched, there is a Disney movie about what he does. He's a civil rights lawyer who has actually done great work bringing justice to men who were in prison for murders that they did not commit, and he has been able to represent them, and a good number of them are free now. So here is what he says, and I also want you to know that, I definitely hope that some of his sharing is not offensive to anybody, but if it is, then hopefully we can talk about it. Okay.
Well, I've been trying to say something about our criminal justice system. This country is very different today than it was 40 years ago. In 1972, there were 300,000 people in jails and prisons. Today, there are 2.3 million. The United States now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. We have 7 million people on probation and parole, and mass incarceration, in my judgment, has fundamentally changed our world. In poor communities and communities of color, there is this despair, there is this hopelessness that is being shaped by these outcomes. 1 out of 3 black men between the ages of 18 and 30 is in jail, in prison, on probation, or parole. In urban communities across this country, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, 50 to 60% of all young men of color are in jail or prison, or on probation and parole. Our system isn't just being shaped in these ways that seem to be distorting around race, they're also distorted by poverty. We have a system of justice in this country that treats you much better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. And yet we seem to be very comfortable. The politics of fear and anger has made us believe that these are problems that are not our problems. We've been disconnected. It's interesting to me, we're looking at some very interesting developments in our work. My state of Alabama, like a number of states, actually permanently disenfranchises you if you have a criminal conviction. Right now in Alabama, 34% of the black male population has permanently lost the right to vote. We're actually projecting in another 10 years, the level of disenfranchisement will be as high as it's been since prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and there is this stunning silence. I represent children. A lot of my clients are very young. The United States is the only country in the world where we sentence 13-year-old children to die in prison. We have life imprisonment without parole for kids in this country. And we're actually doing some litigation. The only country in the world. I represent people on death row. It's interesting, this question of the death penalty. In many ways, we've been taught to think that the real question is, do people deserve to die for the crimes they've committed? And that's a very sensible question. But there's another way of thinking about where we are in our identity. The other way of thinking about it is not, do people deserve to die for the crimes they commit, but do we deserve to kill? I mean, it's fascinating. Death penalty in America is defined by error. For every 9 people who have been executed, we've actually identified one innocent person who's been exonerated and released from death row. A kind of astonishing error rate. 1 out of 9 people, innocent. I mean, it's fascinating. In aviation, we would never let people fly on airplanes if for every 9 planes that took off, 1 would crash. But somehow we can insulate ourselves from this problem. It's not our problem. It's not our burden. It's not our struggle. Well, I talk a lot about these issues. I talk about a race and this question of whether we deserve to kill. And it's interesting, when I teach my students about African American history, I tell them about slavery. I tell them about terrorism, the era that began at the end of Reconstruction that went on to World War II. We don't really know very much about it, but for African Americans in this country, that was an era defined by terror. In many communities, people had to worry about being lynched. They had to worry about being bombed. It was the threat of terror that shaped their lives. And these older people come up to me now, and they say, Mr. Stevenson, you give talks, you make speeches, you tell people to stop saying we're dealing with terrorism for the first time in our nation's history after 9/11. They tell me to say, tell them that we grew up with that. And that era of terrorism, of course, was followed by segregation and decades of racial subordination and apartheid. And yet we have in this country this dynamic where we really don't like to talk about our problems. We don't like to talk about our history. And because of that, we really haven't understood what it's meant to do the things we've done historically. And we're constantly running into each other. We're constantly creating tensions and conflicts. We have a hard time talking about race. And I believe it's because we are unwilling to commit ourselves to a process of truth and reconciliation. In South Africa, people understood that we couldn't overcome apartheid without a commitment to truth and reconciliation. In Rwanda, even after the genocide, there was this commitment. But in this country, we haven't done that. I was giving this lecture in Germany, some lectures in Germany about the death penalty. It was fascinating because one of the scholars stood up after the presentation and said, well, it's deeply troubling to hear what you're talking about. I said, well, we don't have the death penalty in Germany. And of course, we can never have the death penalty in Germany. And the room got very quiet, and this woman said, there's no way with our history we can ever engage in the systematic killing of human beings. It would be unconscionable for us to, in an intentional, deliberate way, set about executing people. And I thought about that. What would it feel like to be living in a world where the nation-state of Germany was executing people, especially if they were disproportionately Jewish? I couldn't bear it. It would be unconscionable. And yet in this country, in the states of the Old South, we execute people where you're 11 times more likely to get the death penalty if the victim is white than if the victim is black, 22 times more likely to get it if the defendant is black and the victim is white. In the very states where there are buried in the ground the bodies of people who were lynched, and yet there is this disconnect. Well, I believe that our identity is at risk. That when we actually don't care about these difficult things, the positive and wonderful things are nonetheless implicated.
All right. So if you have any thoughts about this, please write it in the chat or feel free to talk. These are really important things that we can discuss. And we will keep on discussing. So when we think about creating a fair justice system and restoring the social contract, these are the things that we need to consider. Acknowledge presence of explicit and implicit bias. Recognize and respond to individual and system bias. Understand the role of privilege as an obstacle to justice. And advocate for equity in the justice system by means of culturally responsive practices. And, obviously, because we are all adult learners, You can also add your own. And here are some of the keys to becoming a credible messenger for justice. Practice cultural humility. Express willingness to learn about others' experiences of trauma and racial injustice. Recruit members of the community to partner in sharing the message. Reflect and discuss how personal life and racial experiences impact justice conversations in safe and brave ways. Here are some suggestions. Okay. Now, we want to understand coping. And when we talk about coping, we refer to strategies, we refer to responses that people use to master, tolerate, reduce, or minimize experiences viewed as stressful. Now, coping strategies can be healthy or can be unhealthy too, right? So here are the coping, how coping works. We do appraisal first. So this happens when a person reads situations and whether the situation seems threatening. So we appraise if this is a threatening situation first. We review options. We think about which coping strategies to use and evaluate whether they will work. And we respond. So we do have behaviors or thoughts to deal with threats, challenges, and harmful situations. Now, think about this. We already talked about how our brains work, right? And when we are using coping strategies, we also need to figure out if our brain is in a survival mode or in a learning mode, right? Because that also is going to impact how we're going to appraise, we're going to review options, and we're going to respond. So here is coping with unsafe and traumatic experiences and talking about victimization, which is the loss of personal integrity and control, right? And that can lead us to the survival coping, right? From a survival brain. And this allowed us to experience dysregulation of emotions. We actually become rigid, distorted. We have distorted perspective of situations. We distrust many times, and we might exhibit callous behavior, so nothing gets to us. That's another way of, that's our defense mechanism. We can fake aggression. We become oppositional. We can define rules and violate laws. So, and the other aspect of victimization can be, holding on to this invisible suitcase that has different thoughts, but the thoughts are actually very connected with feeling devaluated, experiencing dehumanization, and also feeling rage, okay? Now, here are some examples of coping strategies. And as you can see, it might be substance abuse, it might be joining gangs, it might be, focusing on body image, it might be carrying a gun, it might be self-mutilation, it might be rage, harming yourself, might be other ways of substance abuse, smoking, might be promiscuity. And at the end, when many of the other maladaptive coping strategies do not work, one other maladaptive coping strategy is suicide. So here we have a physician by the name, his name is Dr. Rich. And he started working in Boston in an emergency room where he was treating a lot of youth, okay? And from his observations, he actually was able to share with us what was happening to this youth. And he called it the cycle of survival, coping, and healing hurt people. And he wrote a book. And, you know, it's a very nice book that talks about these experiences. And it's The Healing the Hurt. Highly recommended. So, you know, in his work, he was treating youth who were shot, stabbed, or assaulted in the emergency room, right? So he was there, he treated them in the emergency department. And then, you know, many of them needed more treatment, so they would be admitted to the inpatient surgical service. And from there, they were discharged to the same communities, to the same streets. And, you know, they were discharged now. They were experiencing acute stress, and many of them would meet criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. After all, they were coming to the ER because they were shot, stabbed, or assaulted, right? So trauma was actually a big role in how, you know, in how they were sort of feeling, right? And now, you know, what ended up happening is that many of these kids will get weapons because they wanted to feel safe, right? Or they will self-medicate, another maladaptive coping strategy, but it was something that they could do, right? And then there was actually, you know, they were willing to take more uninformed risks, and they would retaliate, or they would get re-injured. And from there, they will end up dead, or in jail, or again being shot, stabbed, or assaulted, and going back to the same cycle. So, you know, these are some things that were happening, and, you know, this doctor was able to see it. And then what he started doing is he wanted to intervene, right? Before the kids will get discharged to the same streets. There had to be something there that could help them deal with their acute stress and PTSD symptoms. So they could actually, we could break the cycle, and they could adapt more healthy coping strategies instead of maladaptive ones. And hopefully it could prevent from saving their lives, from going to jail, and from going back to the ER. All right. So how do we keep on building healthy coping and promoting resilience? That's one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit more. Now we know how our brains work. You know, we know that the prefrontal cortex still is in development for many of the youth that we work with. You know, and for boys, it fully develops in their 30s. For women, girls in their mid-20s. So many times what is important is when we are working with youth, we need to make information and directions digestible, right? Something that they could understand. We need to warn youth when transitions are coming up, right? So then we're working with the alarm center. We're really, you know, guiding the process with what we know works. We need to give simple choices, right? Everybody deserves to have options. We need to validate experience and avoid shaming. That's really important. And we need to find pro-social outlets for frustrating feeling or responses to trauma. Okay. Now, if we will be in person, and this is for the people who are planning to become trainers, you know, there are sort of activities that we will do in small groups. This is one of them. We will, you know, ask you with the vignettes that you have to pick one of these kids and to help the kids solve problems. And these are the questions that you will answer. What are some possible ways that your youth is appraising the situation that they are in? What are some of the actions your youth may believe they have for handling this situation? What other actions might you recommend for handling these situations? And what are some strategies for supporting healthy coping? And this is a handout that can be found in the website. Okay. Now I'm going to show you this another TED Talk by the same person that you saw, the same lawyer, Brian Stevenson. And he's talking about his own experiences and his way of how his coping strategies have been influenced by important people in his life. All right. So.
Well, this is a really extraordinary honor for me. I spend most of my time in jails and prisons on death row. I spend most of my time in very low-income communities, in the projects, and places where there's a great deal of hopelessness. And being here at TED and seeing the stimulation, hearing it, has been very, very energizing to me. And one of the things that's emerged in my short time here is that TED has an identity. And you can actually say things here that have impacts around the world, and sometimes when it comes through TED, it has meaning and power that it doesn't have when it doesn't. And I mention that because I think identity is really important. And we've had some fantastic presentations, and I think what we've learned is that if you're a teacher, your words can be meaningful, but if you're a compassionate teacher, they can be especially meaningful. If you're a doctor, you can do some good things, but if you're a caring doctor, you can do some other things. So I want to talk about the power of identity. And I didn't learn about this actually practicing law and doing the work that I do. I actually learned about this from my grandmother. I grew up in a house that was the traditional African-American home that was dominated by a matriarch, and that matriarch was my grandmother. She was tough, she was strong, she was powerful. She was the end of every argument in our family. She was the beginning of a lot of arguments in our family. She was the daughter of people who were actually enslaved. Her parents were born in slavery in Virginia in the 1840s. She was born in the 1880s, and the experience of slavery very much shaped the way she saw the world. My grandmother was tough, but she was also loving. When I would see her as a little boy, she'd come up to me and she'd give me these hugs, and she'd squeeze me so tight I could barely breathe. And then she'd let me go. And an hour or two later, if I saw her, she'd come over to me and she'd say, "Brian, do you still feel me hugging you?" And if I said no, she'd assault me again, and if I'd say yes, she'd leave me alone. And she just had this quality that you always wanted to be near her. And the only challenge was that she had 10 children. My mom was the youngest of her 10 kids, and sometimes when I would go and spend time with her, it'd be difficult to get her time and attention. My cousins would be running around everywhere, and I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, waking up one morning, going into the living room, and all of my cousins were running around, and my grandmother was sitting across the room staring at me. And at first I thought we were playing a game. And I would look at her and I'd smile, but she was very serious. And after about 15 or 20 minutes of this, she got up and she came across the room and she took me by the hand and she said, "Come on, Brian, you and I are going to have a talk." And I remember this just like it happened yesterday. I never will forget it. She took me out back and she said, "Brian, I'm going to tell you something, but you don't tell anybody what I tell you." I said, "Okay, Mom." She said, "Now you make sure you don't do that." I said, "Sure." Then she sat me down and she looked at me and she said, "I want you to know I've been watching you." And she said, "I think you're special." She said, "I think you can do anything you want to do." I will never forget it. And then she said, "I just need you to promise me 3 things, Brian." I said, "Okay, Mom." And she said, "The first thing I want you to promise me is that you'll always love your mom." She said, "That's my baby girl, and you have to promise me now you'll always take care of her." Well, I adored my mom, so I said, "Yes, Mama, I'll do that." Then she said, "The second thing I want you to promise me is that you'll always do the right thing, even when the right thing is the hard thing." And I thought about it, and I said, "Yes, Mama, I'll do that." Then finally she said, "The third thing I want you to promise me is that you'll never drink alcohol." Well, I was 9 years old, so I said, "Yes, Mama, I'll do that." I grew up in the country in the rural South, and I have a brother a year older than me and a sister a year younger. And when I was about 14 or 15, one day my brother came home and he had this 6-pack of beer. I don't know where he got it. And he grabbed me and my sister, and we went out in the woods, and we were kind of just out there doing the stuff we crazily did. And he had a sip of this beer, and he gave some to my sister, and she had some, and they offered it to me. And I said, no, that's okay. Y'all go ahead. I'm not going to have any beer. And my brother said, come on, we're doing this today. You always do what we do. I had some. Your sister had some. Have some beer. I said, no, I don't feel right about that. Y'all go ahead. And then my brother started staring at me. He said, what's wrong with you? Have some beer. Then he looked at me real hard. He said, oh, I hope you're not still hung up on that conversation Mama had with you. I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, oh, Mama tells all the grandkids that they're special. I was devastated. And I'm going to admit something to you. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. I know this might be broadcast broadly, but I'm 52 years old, and I'm going to admit to you that I've never had a drop of alcohol. I don't say that because I think that's virtuous. I say that because there is power in identity. When we create the right kind of identity, we can say things to the world around us that they don't actually believe.
So there is a power in identity, and it helps us to cope. I want to let you know that I didn't meet Brian Stevenson, but I met his brother, Howard Stevenson, who is a professor at UPenn, and he has his own model that works with boys of color. And Howard Stevenson, his model is called PLAY, P-L-A-A-Y. And what actually the model focuses on is to help kids understand more about emotions and understand more about how they can monitor their own emotions so it can prevent any harm. Like when they are in front of authorities or police, and how important it is for them to keep on monitoring their emotions so it can save their lives. So Howard Stevenson is also another person who I will recommend for you to check him out, because he has many good, important information to share when we are working with youth.
Rocio, I just added that in the chat. So if folks want to go check out the Racial Empowerment Collaborative at Penn, that is available.
Awesome. Thank you, Lee. All right. So understanding the lens for coping, when we do that, it's also important for us to know that to understand more the social identities. That social identities provide a lens for appraising stress and deciding the coping strategies, okay? So how might these different social identities impact coping strategies? Think about it. How might race impact our own coping strategies? Gender, immigration or nationality, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and religion, okay? These are actually important things that we need to take into consideration whenever we're working with individuals in general. So we all know that relationships are an integral component of responding to traumatic and stressful life events. Protection from further victimization can occur from groups others view as dangerous. And healthy supports can build resilience portfolio, right? So we all relied, and I believe that, we are all here because we all relied in some networks that provide that safety to us, safety that we can actually sit by Zoom and listen to this presentation, right? So many times connection to others is very important. It actually helps us to co-regulate. And we have been talking about that in the prior models, right? It's very important. It doesn't matter at what stage in your life we are we all need those connections. And, we need healthy connections that can help with the co-regulation. It's important when we are working with youth that we understand how they define relationships, family, and support. This can guide the staff to promote healthy coping strategies. And, obviously, if we are working with a diverse group, it's super important to understand that definition of family is different depending on what cultural background they have. The same thing with relationships and other types of support. So we have talked about safety plan from the beginning. And here is actually another recap of safety plan that I encourage you to use your own terms. And, depending on how you think that youth will take it, you can define it a little bit different. But these are good components to take into consideration when you are developing a safety plan with youth or people who you served. Or many times it's even with us. We could start, identifying more a brief trauma history. We already have like the check boxes that are important because they can be less triggering. Trauma reminders, right? Early warning signs of losing control. That was another thing that we have covered prior. And now it's also important to identify calming behaviors. What calms you down? And these calming behaviors are really connected with our senses. So, a sense of smell, taste, touch, what they can see, what they can listen to. All of those can give us really good, important information and can help us to deal with situations and de-escalate situations. So when we talk about identified trauma history, and if we are working with juveniles involved in the criminal justice system, we want to know what happened before detention and while in detention as for identifying the trauma history. Okay. And here is the safety plan. Here is how it looks. The second part that we talk about is discover trauma reminders. And these are actually some, if kids are in detention center, we are sort of contextualizing what could possibly be a trauma reminder. So we know that kids have like a bedtime, they do have room checks, they can be exposed to violent shows on TV, depending on who is selecting what they are watching. There is a lot of yelling or fighting. There are people too close. They might feel very lonely. So these can be potential trauma reminders. And here is a vignette that we have covered in the prior models about, an example about how we can help Carmen identify her trauma reminders. And this is what she said. So there is a reason I always feel so nervous. It's hard not to be able to concentrate. And unfortunately for Carmen, what happened was that her stepfather would go to school and would take her out of school, buy her ice cream, and then rape her or sexually abuse her. So she couldn't really be in a school feeling safe because, there was that trauma reminder about what happened to her. So here we do have, again, check boxes. So this could be really less triggering for people. And it could also be very important because the minute that we start identifying things, the minute that we can also help our alarm center reset. And always give some options and always give like the other checkbox, because obviously we cannot write down every single one here, but for people to specify if they cannot find it in any of the ones listed. So we have talked a little bit about determining early warning signs and how that could help with our body's alarm system, and understanding that when our alarm center goes off, then there are changes, hormonal changes, physiological changes that are happening at different levels. So the first thing that we notice is that the alarm center goes off. There is not too much communication with the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. There is actually secretion of two hormones. One is the adrenaline and one is the cortisol. And from there, we do have a narrow focus on threat. So that's where our attention is gonna go. And it makes sense. If we are facing danger, we don't need to make plans for tomorrow. We are trying to tackle the danger and survive it, right? We have a black and white thinking, right? All that we want is we want to survive. We don't need, we don't need really so much sophistication there. Because of the adrenaline and cortisol release, we have our breathing speeds up and becomes shallow. Our heart rate increases. Our blood flows away from gut to muscles. So our sympathetic system becomes activated and our parasympathetic system is no longer activated. We don't need it at this time. The peripheral blood vessels constrict. We start shaking and we feel our sweaty palms and feet, all right? So those are some of the early warning signs as a result of experiencing threat. And here it is a box of things that, a list of things that we could help our youth or people in general to recognize. And the minute that they recognize it, and if they're not facing danger, then there is something that then there is the opportunity to reset the alarm center. And the fourth is creating calming and regulating behaviors. And these are some of the examples. Taking time away from a stressful situation, writing in journal, talking to someone who will listen, working out, lying down, listening to music, asking to go to a calm room. Okay, all of these can help. Thinking about the senses can also help. Getting some activities through the senses, like the sound, touch, sight, smell, and taste. And here is another one, proprioception, which is pressure into the body's muscles or joints or activities that require us to use our muscles. Some people recommend therapeutic use of weight, such as heavy quilt or weighted blanket. And pressure and weight can be grounding, calming, and organizing for some people, not for everybody. So we need to make sure that we individualize, according to the person. And the other one is the vestibular input, which is the sensation of movement in a space. So I already said that. And here are the safety plan for that. And here are some questions that are also important. You can find everything. I know that Lee has been super helpful. You can really find all of this information in the materials that are already in the website that I show you. But think about these questions. What helps you stay in control? What has helped you stay in control in the past? What kind of space is most comfortable when you need it? Is there a safe place here you can use? What positive alternative behaviors can you use when you begin to feel unsafe? What incentives work for you? Is there anything else you can tell us that you think would be helpful? So all of these questions are important. And, obviously we need to ask those questions when a person is has a calm alarm, so it can really think clearly and it can really help us to help them, right? So that information is going to be very important, and we are going to make a good use when the time comes and we need to use it, right? And these safety plans are not one-shot deal. Obviously, there are always opportunities to revise, to revisit, to notice what works, what needs a little bit more work. All of those, once you have something written down, then it is a lot easier to review it or modify it. So here is the message here. So when we provide youth with greater self-awareness leads to better self-control. Better self-control leads to more positive coping strategies. More positive coping strategies reduce violence. Reduced violence lessens injuries. Fewer injuries lead to a more positive unit environment. All these lead to improved job satisfaction and also, an overall well-being. So the process of trauma-informed collaboration with youth through cultural humility can lead to safer facilities and can lead to a quicker recovery. Here are the take-home messages. Historical, intergenerational, or system-induced trauma can have significant impacts on youth. Trauma leads to survival coping strategies that may be maladaptive. Maladaptive coping strategies can lead to illness and premature death. And we all can help youth develop more positive coping strategies. So I have completed Module 3. We have all completed Module 3. So let us know your comments. Let us know if you have any questions. So if there are no comments or questions, I hope that you join us. Go ahead.
Has her hand raised.
Okay, go ahead, Angela.
Angela, can you hear me? I took off my headphones temporarily. Hold on.
Yes, we can hear you.
So, thank you for sharing some of the positive coping mechanisms. I think in our training, particularly around youth, it would really be helpful to kind of highlight some of those opportunities, particularly de-escalation techniques and conflict resolution, because I think our youth find themselves often in, having put themselves in a predicament and they don't know how to get out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes, they might end up making poor choices and decisions when they come up against that stress or conflict. Mm-hmm. And it's just like they spiral out of control. And so the more we can do to equip them with those coping skills, and so we have to be cognizant of the various options and tools that can be used. Recognizing the negative, so those outward signs of stress, like the cutting and the all those other things you showed earlier. I think it's good to know what those are, so you can definitely identify it. But if we can better equip ourselves with the positives and lean on those a little bit more, I think we have better outcomes more rapidly. Not to discount any of the negatives, because you definitely have to deal with that.
Yes.
Having immediate access to tools to help them cope, I think, is tremendously important.
Yes.
And so they can help themselves. Like, we're not always going to be there.
they have to be equipped to be able to make better decisions.
Well said, Angela. Thank you. Yes, it's super important, I believe, when we help youth to become proactive, right? Once their alarms are set and they are going off, it's very hard to reason because they are not there. I mean, they cannot really think clearly. But, you know, if they continuously use a safety plan or a plan that's going to help them to become more self-aware, then there are more things that they are going to be able to stop before they act on it. And that's the piece. That's what we want. So I really thank you for your time and your participation. And I hope that you join us for our last module that's coming up on Thursday, right, Lee?
Correct. Yep. We'll be here on Thursday, same time, same place. And feel free to email with any questions. If you email the New England MHTTC email, let me just double check that I have that correctly for you. Yeah, so it'll be newengland@mhttcnetwork.org, and I'll put that in the chat. I also put in the chat the case vignettes as well. So if you'd like to download those, but also, as I said in the chat to a couple folks who are asking, we will be sending out all of these materials as well as an evaluation form and some content check questions for CEUs if after our final session on Thursday. Thank you, Riley. Let me just double check. I'm going to look at my calendar too, so I don't give you anything in the wrong information. Think Trauma on Thursday is going to be starting at 12 noon Eastern time. So it will be from 12 noon to 3 p.m. as well. Thank you so much for that clarification question, Riley, because yes, I want to make sure everybody comes to us and joins. And thank you, Graciela. Just put in the chat the link to the New England MHTTC website if you need more information about other trainings and events that we will be putting on. But otherwise, thank you so much, Rocio and Doris and everybody who has attended. Gracias, sí. And we will hope to see you on Thursday. And I hope you have a fantastic week. Until then, and be well.
Thank you very much. Take great care.